In the midst of World War II, when front lines shifted with alarming speed and a single mistake could cost thousands of lives, the United States undertook an unprecedented experiment in psychological warfare. In 1944, a special tactical unit was formed within the U.S. Army, known by the nickname the Ghost Army. Unlike any other division, its soldiers did not fight with conventional weapons. Instead, they waged war with illusions, sound, and deception, creating scenarios so convincing that the German high command often believed them to be real. Their arsenal included not rifles and artillery, but creativity, engineering, and artistry. Comprised of painters, designers, engineers, set decorators, and advertising professionals, the unit turned the battlefield into a canvas and every operation into a carefully orchestrated performance. The mission of the Ghost Army was precise, dangerous, and unconventional: to create the illusion of entire divisions where none existed, misleading the enemy, and directing German forces toward fictitious threats. They employed a remarkable variety of tools: inflatable tanks and trucks, fake artillery pieces, elaborate camouflage, and powerful loudspeakers broadcasting the sounds of troop movements over vast distances. Their objective was not merely to distract the enemy, but to convince German commanders that these phantom units were real, forcing them to make strategic decisions based on fabricated intelligence. Every operation began with meticulous planning. Artists drafted life-sized models of military equipment, crafting tanks, artillery, and armored vehicles from canvas, rubber, and wood. Set decorators designed environments so realistic that reconnaissance aircraft and aerial observers could not distinguish between the real and the artificial. Engineers built mobile radio units and speaker systems capable of reproducing the sounds of marching troops, engines, and gunfire, creating an acoustic illusion of entire battalions in motion. In some cases, recordings even included simulated officer commands and troop conversations, adding layers of authenticity to the deception. One of the most famous examples of the Ghost Army's work took place during the Battle of the Bulge, in the Ardennes, on the final stages of the German offensive. At a time when the Wehrmacht sought to break through Allied lines, the Ghost Army deployed inflatable tanks on open hills, set smoke screens, and played recordings of artillery and troop movements over long distances. German observers, confident in their own experience, reported the presence of large American formations that did not actually exist. Misled by these illusions, the German High Command redirected forces, delayed their assault, and inadvertently allowed Allied units to fortify key positions, saving countless lives in the process. Many of the Ghost Army soldiers had previously worked as artists and designers in New York, Los Angeles, and other major American cities. Their skills, seemingly unrelated to military service, proved invaluable on the front lines. They painted massive canvas panels to mimic shadows of tanks, created cardboard and fabric mock-ups, and strategically positioned these decoys in locations visible to enemy aircraft. Soldiers also employed clever lighting techniques, using floodlights and mirrors at night to cast convincing shadows of armored vehicles. Every visual trick was designed to manipulate enemy perception, turning imagination into a tactical weapon. Sound played an equally critical role. Specially outfitted trucks carried loudspeakers that broadcasted recordings of troop movements, artillery, and battle noises over several kilometers. These acoustic operations often took place during evening and nighttime hours, when sound traveled further and enemy units were more vulnerable to deception. German patrols and reconnaissance teams could not distinguish the fake sounds from reality, intensifying the illusion of full-scale military formations. The psychological impact of the Ghost Army was profound. Some German units entirely altered their plans based on phantom troop deployments. Often, they attacked positions that did not exist, wasting men and equipment while exposing themselves to danger. Meanwhile, Ghost Army soldiers faced real frontline risks. Their decoys were not invulnerable. Inflatable tanks and wooden artillery frequently became targets for artillery fire. Despite the dangers, no operation of the Ghost Army ever failed, and their illusions significantly contributed to Allied strategic advantages. The operations of the Ghost Army remained secret for decades. Soldiers and commanders were bound by strict non-disclosure agreements, and even after the war, most details of their work remained unknown to the public. It was not until the 1990s that information about the unit was declassified, revealing how a group of artists and engineers had influenced the course of war using sound, light, and imagination. Today, the Ghost Army is celebrated as a unique example of creativity in warfare, a testament to the power of artistry and strategy working hand in hand in the most unexpected circumstances. The daily life of a Ghost Army soldier was unlike anything experienced by a conventional combat unit. Unlike infantrymen, artillery crews, or tank operators, these men relied not on brute force, but on ingenuity, timing, and meticulous attention to detail. Mornings in the field often began with sketches, measurements, and calculations. Artists would measure distances and angles, determining the optimal placement for their canvas tanks or fake artillery. Engineers would test the range and volume of loudspeakers, ensuring that the sounds of armored vehicles or marching troops would carry precisely as intended. Even the wind direction mattered. One careless gust could reveal the seams of a fabric tank or distort the sound, compromising the illusion. One of the core missions was to simulate entire divisions of armored units. Inflatable tanks, meticulously designed to mimic real models, were mounted on wheeled platforms. From a distance, their contours, turret shapes, and painted camouflage made them indistinguishable from authentic M4 Shermans or M10 tank destroyers. Yet, they were light, portable, and could be inflated or deflated within minutes. Soldiers would move them strategically across ridgelines, often under the cover of darkness, arranging them in realistic formations. By day, aerial reconnaissance planes would photograph the scene, convinced they were observing genuine battalions ready for attack. Audio deception was equally elaborate. Trucks equipped with massive amplifiers broadcast pre-recorded sounds of entire regiments on the move. Engineers recorded not only engines and gunfire, but also conversations, orders, and even marching cadence. Each sound was carefully synchronized with visual decoys, so that when an enemy observer heard the rumble of approaching armor, their eyes confirmed what their ears were reporting. In some operations, these recordings would be played in multiple locations simultaneously, giving the illusion of a massive force advancing along multiple roads and ridges. The Germans, relying on reconnaissance and intercepted communications, often believed they faced a real threat of overwhelming scale. Life in the field was not devoid of danger. Although the soldiers were not expected to engage in direct combat, they were positioned within artillery range of German units. Inflatable tanks were sometimes hit by shellfire, and camouflage netting offered minimal protection. In one operation near the Rhine River, a platoon of Ghost Army soldiers had to move decoys across a ridge while enemy artillery shelled the area. One young artist, John Whitney, later recalled in interviews that the scene felt like a theater performance with real bullets flying. We were actors and stagehands on a battlefield. Every move had to be precise, or the illusion would collapse, and we could be killed. The personal backgrounds of these soldiers were as diverse as their missions. Many were graduates of art schools such as the Pratt Institute in New York or the Rhode Island School of Design. Some were advertising executives, skilled in visual persuasion. Others were engineers who had designed special effects for theater or film. They brought their civilian expertise to the battlefield, transforming it into a stage where the enemy could be manipulated with a brushstroke, a piece of canvas, or a cleverly timed sound. Their creativity was their greatest weapon, yet they had to adapt to military discipline, following strict chains of command and operating under the constant threat of discovery by the enemy. One remarkable operation occurred in the lead-up to the Allied crossing of the Rhine in 1945. The Ghost Army was tasked with convincing the Germans that a massive American force was stationed miles from its actual location. Soldiers set up rows of inflatable tanks along a hilltop, arranged artillery pieces made of wood and canvas, and positioned dummy trucks to simulate supply lines. At night, loudspeakers played the roar of engines, the hum of radios, and the voices of officers giving orders. Fog machines and smoke generators added atmospheric effects, creating the illusion of a mobilizing army under cover of dawn mist. German reconnaissance planes reported significant troop concentrations, and high command diverted forces to counter the phantom threat, giving real Allied divisions the time and space to cross the Rhine with minimal resistance. The psychological impact of these operations cannot be overstated. German commanders, convinced by visual and audio evidence, frequently made decisions that weakened their front lines or delayed attacks. Soldiers on both sides observed the deception unfold in real time, often unaware of the full scale of the illusion. For the men of the Ghost Army, the success of each mission was a combination of artistry, engineering, and precise timing. A slight misplacement of a decoy, a poorly timed sound effect, or an error in camouflage could unravel hours of planning. The pressure was constant, but the reward was the knowledge that their efforts were saving lives and shaping the course of the war. Despite the secrecy surrounding their missions, the Ghost Army had a tangible legacy. Many participants returned to civilian life, becoming prominent artists, architects, and designers. Their experiences in the field influenced post-war visual arts and creative industries. Yet for decades, their contributions remained largely unknown. Declassified documents and first-hand interviews only began to shed light on their work in the 1990s, revealing the innovative techniques and daring operations that had remained a military secret for half a century. The Ghost Army serves as a testament to the unconventional possibilities of warfare. Where traditional tactics relied on firepower and manpower, this unit demonstrated that imagination, deception, and artistry could wield equal influence on the battlefield. Their operations combined the science of sound and optics with the subtlety of human psychology, creating illusions that altered enemy strategy and saved countless lives. Today, the story of the Ghost Army stands as a unique example of how creativity and ingenuity can triumph under the most dangerous circumstances, bridging the worlds of art and war in a way never before seen in military history. In the summer of 1944, following the D-Day landings in Normandy, the Allies sought every advantage to secure a foothold in France and prevent German forces from mounting effective counterattacks. It was here that the Ghost Army would first demonstrate the full scope of its unconventional capabilities. The unit, officially designated the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, was deployed not on the front lines of direct combat, but in positions where illusion could create strategic outcomes. They were tasked with simulating troop movements, creating the appearance of large American formations in areas where the actual forces were much smaller, and drawing German attention away from critical supply lines and bridgeheads. One of the earliest operations involved the creation of a phantom armored division near the small town of St. Lo. Soldiers of the Ghost Army spent days preparing the field, constructing inflatable Sherman tanks and wooden artillery mock-ups. Engineers carefully mounted powerful loudspeakers on modified jeeps and trucks, capable of projecting the sounds of engines, marching troops, and even radio chatter across several kilometers. Artists painted the decoys with realistic camouflage patterns, replicating the appearance of real units from the air. Every shadow, seam, and contour was scrutinized to ensure that aerial reconnaissance planes would mistake them for actual armored formations. The operation was timed to coincide with a real Allied movement aimed at outflanking German defensive positions. By broadcasting recorded sounds of engines and troop movements from several elevated positions, the Ghost Army created the illusion of a full division mobilizing. German reconnaissance pilots, flying over St. Lo, photographed what they believed to be substantial forces preparing for an advance. The reports from the Luftwaffe misled German commanders, who shifted artillery and reserves to counter the phantom threat. This diversion allowed real American units to move undetected and secure critical roads and bridges, directly impacting the success of the campaign. Soldiers recall the tension of these operations in vivid detail. Private First Class William Taylor, an artist responsible for painting tank decoys, described the experience as like being in a theater with real bullets flying. Every detail had to be perfect. If one tank looked wrong, or a speaker was placed incorrectly, the whole illusion would fail, and lives could be lost. Despite the lack of conventional combat, the men faced real danger. Some decoys were hit by German artillery fire, and reconnaissance planes occasionally strafed positions suspected of harboring real troops. Yet, the unit's discipline and ingenuity allowed them to adapt quickly, moving decoys or adjusting sound patterns under fire. Another remarkable operation took place in the Normandy bocage, a landscape of dense hedgerows, narrow lanes, and hidden fields that posed unique challenges for deception. The Ghost Army employed a combination of visual and acoustic illusions to simulate the presence of multiple armored divisions, while real units maneuvered unseen through alternate routes. Inflatable tanks were positioned on hilltops, their shadows carefully calculated to appear realistic from above. Smoke generators and small controlled explosions simulated the activity of artillery, creating the impression of constant engagement. Loudspeakers broadcasted the sounds of engines and troop commands, synchronized to coincide with German reconnaissance overflights. The effectiveness of these operations was evident in German communications intercepted by Allied intelligence. Officers reported observing large formations that did not exist, estimating troop strengths far higher than reality. In several cases, entire battalions were redirected to counter non-existent attacks, reducing pressure on actual Allied forces and contributing to the success of the Normandy campaign. The Ghost Army had mastered a psychological warfare strategy that leveraged the enemy's reliance on observation and reconnaissance, turning perception itself into a weapon. Beyond the technical and tactical aspects, the daily life of the Ghost Army in France reflected a blend of military discipline and artistic creativity. Soldiers lived in mobile camps, often in abandoned farmhouses or tents, where they could sketch, paint, and construct decoys between operations. Engineers tested the acoustics of fields and roads, determining how sound would carry under different weather conditions. The soldiers maintained detailed logs of decoy placements, sound timings, and visual effects, ensuring that each operation could be replicated or adapted as needed. Humor, camaraderie, and artistic expression were essential coping mechanisms, helping soldiers maintain morale amid the stress and danger of frontline assignments. The Ghost Army also faced logistical challenges unique to their mission. Inflatable tanks and wooden decoys required careful transportation and setup, sometimes under the cover of night. Loudspeakers needed portable generators and precise calibration. Weather conditions could disrupt sound propagation or reveal the materials used in decoys. Soldiers had to be engineers, artists, and tacticians simultaneously, constantly problem-solving in real time. Their success depended on meticulous preparation, coordination, and the ability to improvise when circumstances changed unexpectedly. By the autumn of 1944, the Ghost Army had established a pattern of successful operations across France. From Saint-Lô to the hedgerows of Normandy, their illusions diverted German attention, reduced casualties among frontline units, and influenced strategic decisions at the highest levels. The combination of sound, visual deception, and psychological insight created a force multiplier far beyond the unit's actual size. Reports from German intelligence consistently overestimated American strength in areas where Ghost Army units were active, a testament to the meticulous planning and execution of their missions. Even in moments of apparent calm, the unit's work continued. Soldiers painted fake roads and supply lines, constructed dummy encampments, and created the illusion of artillery batteries hidden in fields or forests. Every element of their operation was designed to manipulate enemy perception. The Ghost Army understood that war was not only fought with bullets and shells, but with information, belief, and expectation. In this sense, they operated as much in the realm of psychology and art as in military strategy. The Normandy campaign also highlighted the Ghost Army's adaptability. In one instance, enemy reconnaissance identified a supposed division near the town of Corentin. In reality, the unit had moved several kilometers away overnight. To maintain the illusion, the Ghost Army played recorded sounds of engines and troop movements from the abandoned location, creating the impression that forces remained in place. German intelligence continued to report activity, unaware that all visible troops were fictitious. This type of operation, known as a phantom displacement, became a signature tactic, demonstrating the unit's mastery of time, space, and perception. By the end of 1944, the Ghost Army had played a pivotal role in the Allied advance through France, contributing to both operational success and the preservation of countless lives. Their efforts, though largely hidden from public view for decades, exemplified the innovative integration of art, engineering, and psychological strategy in modern warfare. Each operation combined technical precision, creative vision, and human ingenuity, proving that deception could be as decisive as firepower. By December 1944, the winter had descended on Europe with bitter cold, fog, and snow, transforming the Ardennes forest into a treacherous and surreal battlefield. German forces, seeking to launch a surprise counteroffensive through the Ardennes, a maneuver that would later become the Battle of the Bulge, were advancing with the intent of splitting Allied lines and seizing key supply routes. It was in this harsh, frozen landscape that the Ghost Army would demonstrate the full breadth of its ingenuity, blending visual and acoustic deception with precise timing to manipulate enemy perception and influence the course of one of the war's most critical campaigns. The Ardennes presented unique challenges. Dense forests, narrow roads, and deep snow limited visibility and constrained troop movements. The Ghost Army adapted by using inflatable tanks, trucks, and artillery, strategically positioned on ridgelines and open fields that could be observed from enemy reconnaissance aircraft. Smoke generators were deployed to simulate the activity of real artillery units, and small controlled explosions mimicked the sounds of shelling and gunfire. Engineers carefully selected vantage points for loudspeakers, broadcasting the sounds of movement, engines, and troop commands across valleys and through the dense woods. The cold amplified certain sounds, carrying them farther than anticipated and creating the impression of massive troop concentrations. One notable operation involved simulating an entire armored division near the town of Bastogne, a key objective for the Germans. Soldiers of the Ghost Army spent hours during frigid nights arranging inflatable tanks, mock artillery, and supply trucks in formations that appeared convincingly realistic from the air. At the same time, sound trucks were positioned along parallel routes, playing pre-recorded engine noises, marching troops, and radio chatter. The recordings were carefully synchronized with the visual decoys. Engines roared at intervals matching the movements of the inflatable tanks, while simulated artillery fire echoed through the valleys. German reconnaissance aircraft, flying over the area, captured photographs of what appeared to be full battalions preparing to advance. Soldiers remember the surreal quality of these operations. Private John Weaver, an artist responsible for painting camouflages on decoys, later described the scene. It was like creating a giant chessboard, but the pieces were illusions. Every brushstroke, every fold in a canvas, every shadow had to be perfect. And the enemy believed it. The men endured freezing temperatures, snowdrifts that reached over their knees, and the constant awareness that German artillery could strike at any moment. Despite these dangers, their creativity and discipline allowed them to maintain the illusion with remarkable precision. The impact on German operations was immediate and profound. German commanders, convinced by both visual and auditory evidence, overestimated the presence of American forces in multiple sectors. Entire units were diverted to respond to the Phantom divisions, leaving gaps elsewhere along the front. In some instances, German patrols moved into positions expecting to encounter large American formations, only to find empty fields. By manipulating perception, the Ghost Army effectively reduced the pressure on real Allied units, allowing them to reinforce Bastogne, hold key positions, and ultimately turn back the German offensive. The Ghost Army also innovated with phantom maneuvers, a tactic involving the appearance of movement where none existed. In one instance, decoy tanks were moved overnight using simple pulley systems and wheeled platforms. Sound recordings were simultaneously shifted to new locations, creating the illusion that the division was advancing or repositioning. German reconnaissance repeatedly reported movement, unaware that the troops were entirely fictitious. These operations required meticulous planning. Engineers calculated distances and acoustics, artists ensured visual continuity, and every soldier was responsible for executing their part flawlessly under the pressure of freezing weather and potential enemy fire. Life during the Ardennes operations was grueling but fostered camaraderie and improvisation. Soldiers converted abandoned farmhouses into makeshift workshops for repairing decoys, painting camouflage, and testing sound equipment. They shared food, stories, and humor, often in stark contrast to the deadly seriousness of their work. Artists sketched the snow-covered landscape, engineers adjusted speaker angles, and technicians monitored the quality of recordings to ensure the illusion remained believable. The combination of military discipline and creative problem-solving was essential. The success of each mission depended on precision and timing. The psychological effect on German troops and commanders was amplified by the harsh winter conditions. Fog, snow, and low visibility made the decoys appear even more convincing. Inflatable tanks partially obscured by mist looked indistinguishable from real armored vehicles, while the sounds of engines and artillery echoed across the valleys, creating a sense of overwhelming force. German reports consistently overestimated the strength and positions of American forces, a direct result of ghost army operations. These misperceptions forced German commanders to alter plans, divert troops, and ultimately contributed to the failure of the offensive. One of the most remarkable aspects of the Ardennes campaign was the unit's ability to combine artistic creativity with psychological strategy. Soldiers not only created visual and auditory illusions but also studied the enemy's likely perceptions and reactions. They understood that deception was most effective when it exploited human expectation. The enemy would see what they believed could exist, hear what they expected to hear, and interpret these signals through their preconceptions. By controlling the narrative of the battlefield, the Ghost Army wielded influence far beyond its actual numbers. As the Battle of the Bulge concluded and the winter of 1944 to 1945 waned, the Ghost Army shifted operations toward preparing for the crossing of the Rhine River, the final major obstacle to the heart of Germany. Their experience in the Ardennes had honed every aspect of their craft: placement of decoys, synchronization of sound and visual effects, and the orchestration of large-scale illusions under extreme conditions. These lessons would be critical for the complex operations that lay ahead, where deception would once again play a pivotal role in saving lives, confusing the enemy, and securing strategic advantages for the Allies. By early 1945, as the Allies advanced toward Germany, the Rhine River represented the final major obstacle before the heart of the Reich. Crossing it required careful planning and immense resources, but the Ghost Army was called upon not to fight directly, but to shape enemy perception, creating illusions that would distract, mislead, and confuse German defenders. Their mission was as audacious as it was complex: to simulate massive American forces poised to cross at multiple points along the river, while the actual troops prepared the true crossing under less scrutiny. Preparations for the operation began weeks in advance. The soldiers of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops scouted locations along the Rhine, identifying ridgelines, open fields, and towns that could serve as observation points for enemy reconnaissance. Inflatable tanks, wooden artillery, and canvas trucks were transported across hundreds of kilometers, sometimes under the cover of darkness to avoid detection. Engineers tested loudspeaker setups, determining how sound would carry across the river valleys, while artists painted decoys in precise camouflage patterns to appear convincing from both aerial and ground observation. Even the shadows cast by the decoys were carefully calculated to replicate the look of real armored divisions. One of the key tactics involved phantom bridgeheads. Inflatable tanks were positioned along riverbanks, accompanied by dummy artillery and supply trucks. Smoke generators and small pyrotechnics simulated ongoing preparations for an attack, while loudspeakers broadcast the roar of engines, troop commands, and marching soldiers. The illusions were designed to be multi-layered. German reconnaissance could see apparent divisions, hear the activity of battalions moving into position, and intercept simulated radio chatter suggesting imminent crossings. The Germans, believing the reports, had to divert attention and resources to counter these imaginary threats. Soldiers later recalled the surreal quality of these operations. Private David Stein, responsible for coordinating acoustic deception, wrote in his diary, "We were creating a ghost army, but it felt real. The snow, the fog, the sounds bouncing across the river, it all worked together. From the enemy's perspective, it had to be convincing. Every detail mattered, and one mistake could be disastrous." Despite being behind the front lines, the men were still exposed to danger. German artillery occasionally targeted areas believed to hold actual divisions, and reconnaissance aircraft frequently overflew their positions. The Ghost Army's decoys and setups had to withstand both observation and sporadic attacks. Another key tactic was the use of multidirectional sound deception. Engineers set up multiple speaker arrays along different points of the riverbank, broadcasting recordings that suggested troop movements in several locations simultaneously. From the air, German pilots saw smoke and shadows of tanks, From the ground, artillery crews heard the unmistakable rumble of engines approaching. In combination, these illusions created the perception of overwhelming force, convincing German commanders that any counterattack would be futile. Meanwhile, the real Allied divisions quietly prepared pontoon bridges and ferry crossings at points far from the simulated threats. The Rhine operations also highlighted the Ghost Army's creativity in environmental adaptation. Snow-covered fields and low winter sun presented challenges for camouflage and visibility. Soldiers used natural features, trees, hedgerows, and ridgelines, to enhance the realism of their decoys. Smoke and fog were carefully timed to mask seams in inflatable tanks or the outlines of wooden artillery. Artists painted the decoys with weathered textures, simulating mud and frost, making them appear battle-hardened rather than artificial. Engineers adjusted loudspeakers to compensate for wind and temperature effects on sound propagation. Every aspect of the operation was meticulously calibrated to exploit the limitations of enemy observation. The effectiveness of the deception was evident almost immediately. German intelligence reported significant American troop concentrations along multiple points of the Rhine, far exceeding actual numbers. Units were redeployed to counter threats that did not exist, and defensive artillery was spread thin across the front. This diversion of attention allowed Allied engineers and soldiers to construct and secure actual crossing points with far less resistance than would have been expected under normal circumstances. By manipulating perception, the Ghost Army directly contributed to the success of one of the most critical maneuvers of the final Allied advance into Germany. Soldiers' accounts also reveal the human dimension of the operation. Life in the field during the Rhine deception was grueling. Freezing temperatures, snow, and limited rations tested endurance, while the constant need for precision imposed psychological pressure. Artists, engineers, and technicians worked around the clock, adjusting decoys, recalibrating loudspeakers, and monitoring German reconnaissance. Humor and camaraderie became essential tools for morale, helping soldiers cope with both the stress of exposure and the surreal nature of their mission. Private First Class Samuel Cohen noted, "We were artists and tacticians at the same time. One moment we were painting shadows on tanks, the next we were calculating how sound would travel over ice and river water. It was exhausting but exhilarating, knowing that every trick might save lives." The Rhine River operations marked the climax of the Ghost Army's wartime achievements. Their combination of visual, acoustic, and psychological deception had reached a level of sophistication unmatched in the conflict. By simulating massive forces, manipulating enemy perceptions, and directing attention away from actual troop movements, they helped ensure the safe and effective crossing of the Rhine, an event that hastened the collapse of German resistance and brought the Allies closer to victory. Following the Rhine operations, the Ghost Army continued to conduct smaller-scale deceptions as Allied forces advanced into the heart of Germany. They created phantom headquarters, simulated resupply convoys, and orchestrated movement illusions, all designed to maintain the perception of overwhelming force and keep German forces off balance. These final missions, though less dramatic than the Rhine crossing, reinforced the unit's mastery of psychological warfare and highlighted the enduring impact of their work on modern military strategy. Decades later, the legacy of the Ghost Army became widely recognized. Participants went on to careers as prominent artists, designers, architects, and engineers, carrying the lessons of innovation, precision, and psychological insight into civilian life. Their wartime experiences demonstrated that creativity, ingenuity, and strategic thinking could alter the course of battles just as effectively as conventional firepower. The Ghost Army remains a singular example of how art, science, and warfare can converge to produce extraordinary outcomes under the most extreme circumstances.